Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today on financial education in the workplace. I think we all acknowledge we've been living through what has been an extremely difficult sort of 6 or 7 months, and that's set to continue as we move into what is looking like a very long winter. I think all aspects of employee wellbeing are really important, and the one area we're focusing on today is financial wellbeing, and just having a think really about what employers within their own resources and within their constraints that they're operating under, what they might be able to do to help employees, and also looking a bit around the legal framework around that too. So just a few housekeeping tips before we get into the detail of the webinar. I will be sharing my screen, so you'll be able to see the slides, and I'll be moving the slides on for the speakers. If you can see the slides at the moment, you can select the view option and select side by side, which will mean you'll be able to see all of the speakers' lovely faces without obscuring the slides. There's a Q&A box which you can submit questions, and we'll probably hopefully try and answer as many of those as possible throughout the webinar. If we can't, we'll be providing some follow-up after the session for you, so feel free to ask anything at all that you want, within reason of course. And at the end, we'd be really grateful if you could take a minute or two just to fill in the survey, just really to give us feedback on how the session has been for you, and ideas for future sessions that you'd like to hear. So in terms of what we're covering today, we're joined by various guest speakers. So the first session is Richard Lee from Gowling and Rob Harper of Hymans, both partners within those organisations. And as well as being pensions professionals, I was really interested to find out that both have previous experience in the theatre. So Richard working behind the scenes on the Buddy Holly musical, where he met his lovely wife Maria, and Rob playing a more active role in the Full Monty musical, which involved him stripping to a lot less than he's wearing now. So hopefully they won't burst out into song during the course of the webinar. We've then got Rachelle Trueman, who's the Pensions Manager UK and Ireland at Molson Coors, who's going to talk to you about what they've been doing at Molson Coors to help their employees. And as well as being an excellent pensions professional that I've worked with over the years, Rachelle is also a keen chef and has taken to escaping from her desk and cooking up treats with online cookery classes during lockdown. And then finally, and not last but least, Alison Garton, who's one of our leading rising stars in our pensions team, and associate in the team, who'll be talking to you about pension scams. Alison, as well as all of the pension stuff she's doing, has found time in her spare time to turn her houseplant collection from 18 to a fantastic 47 with a terrarium. So if anyone wants any cuttings, just please add that to your survey feedback at the end of the session. So there shouldn't be any fire alarms. If there is, it's my own, and I've forgotten to turn my oven off. But hopefully the session will go without any hiccups. So first of all, I will turn to Richard and Rob, who are going to talk about financial education in the workplace, employers' obligations and solutions. I'm just going to move the slides on, Rich. I think there is a slight delay.
Yeah. Thanks, Jo.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't think I'll look at Rob quite in the same way ever again. So a bit of background: changing pensions landscape. Why is this financial education piece so important? Well, going back to 2012, workplace pension reform, or auto-enrolment, has now been responsible for about 10.5 million people being new savers in the pensions world. We then have the emphasis on the regulator's approach to DC with codes and guidance. We've got this huge shift. We've now, I think, got fewer than 1 million active DB savers, and we've got about 18 to 20 million active DC savers. So with that huge shift of responsibility towards the individual, we've got to move from paper to digital, which is happening rapidly. But needs to be carefully catered for. Pension freedoms back in 2015, so releasing a lot more flexibility for individual savers. And then finally, trust and confidence. Where is that in the pensions industry? And I don't think it's with politicians, but we'll see what employers' position is. So just moving to the next slide, I'm going to paint a bit of legal landscape, basically laying out the employer's duties. Hopefully it will appear in front of you. Now, what is the duty on employers to provide information to employees? So of all the benefits that employers set out, where are the red lines? What do employers have to provide? What should they provide and what shouldn't they provide? These are real red lines. These aren't politicians' red lines that seem to be crossed every other day of the week. And just moving on to a politician, before I take his name in vain.
Sorry,
it does
Rich,
take something. Don't worry. It does take something these days to be flabbergasted by what a politician says. And oh no, we moved on a slide too many there, I think. But some of you will have seen Guy Opperman. In fact, we've moved on loads of slides. Guy Opperman's statement yesterday, which frankly I was absolutely flabbergasted by. And he said, I think it's a perfectly good idea for individuals to take loans from their pension savings. Thanks very much for that, Guy. All of those who've put a lot of effort into keeping and retaining pension savings. Don't you know about the lifetime ISA? Don't you know how hard it is to get loans back into pension savings? So good to know the pensions minister is right on top of things. Now, this slide that's in front of you now just summarises the different areas where employers have to provide pensions or benefits information. So Pensions Act 08 is auto-enrolment info. Employment Rights Act is your standard T's and C's, including pensions. Listed changes, information when employers are proposing changes to pension arrangements. 2P on business transfers and service provider changes, basic information, and of course, measures if changes are proposed. There's then stakeholder pensions, those of you remember in 2000 when they were introduced, and the basic position on stakeholder, and the fact that there are exemptions for employers in terms of what they can say about stakeholder pension arrangements. And then finally, which I'm going to briefly touch on with some cases, the implied duty under employment contracts. So what is the position for employers? So just moving to the next slide, which hopefully will appear magically in front of you. So the first case, one of the key cases, is called Scally. This was about NHS doctors, and they had a collectively agreed position, which meant that they could buy additional pension in the NHS scheme. Now, that arrangement was made with the unions, didn't involve the individuals, and some doctors basically missed the timing window to buy additional pension. And the case revolved around whether the employer should have provided information to them about those deadlines. And in these particular circumstances, the court said, as you'll see on the next slide, that yes, the employer was under an obligation to take reasonable steps to bring this information to the individual's notice so that they could take advantage of this particular benefit. Now, that's not the only story. There are limitations on this duty. So it was collectively negotiated, individuals not involved. It was a valuable right, and also the court found that the individuals weren't reasonably expected to be aware of the right. So those are the scope, the red lines or the limitations, if you like. The next case, moving sort of 5 years or so forward, 8 years forward, University of Nottingham and Ayot, an early retirement case. Individual decided to retire early at the end of July. Financially, it would have been much better for them had they gone a month later. And the issue in the challenge that was brought was there a duty on the university, on the employer, to have told the individual to wait a month? And the answer that the court came to was no, the individual had all the information that they needed. It wasn't the employer's responsibility to tell the employee that they were making a poor decision. So clear red line. After the IAT case, which hopefully the next slide will materialize in front of your eyes, slowly but surely. And there's the one we just talked about. So Crossley and Faithful and Gould, this was about a senior director within the business who was unfortunately ill, was unable to work. So it's a disability benefit scheme. And he decided to resign, but that actually finished his benefit. And the court found that it would not be reasonable to impose a duty on employers to tell employees when they were making poor economic decisions. So again, the duty here is pretty clear and very restricted. A couple of ombudsman's claims just before Rob comes in, fully clothed, I'm glad to see. So Ramsey, back in 2014, this again was an arrangement to buy additional pension. When he'd done that, he was hit with a tax charge, and he claimed that the employer should have told him about this specifically, but the Deputy Ombudsman said, no, there's no duty to tell employees again when they are making poor financial decisions. There've been general tax changes across the UK, which he should have been aware of. And then slightly different, a year later, Cherry, this is a police case, and there are several of these. Individual should have known when they were taking their early retirement from the police pension scheme and then being re-employed that they would hit a severe tax charge for being re-employed within 30 days. And actually, in this case, it was found that the employer, in these specific and limited circumstances, did have a duty to tell the individual about the tax consequences of their actions. So those are the duties that employers have and the scope of them. They're, as you can tell, pretty narrow. On the next slide, we just move into the difference between guidance and advice. And of course, the difficult area for employers is making sure always that they haven't stepped into regulated advice. So on the left, you can see the guidance arena. These are generic pieces of information, suggestions generally made, but they are not individual and they are not recommendations. On the other side is the advice arena, where actual recommendations on individual circumstances are being made. And that has obviously been fairly recently reformed as well. And those are key differences that employers need to be aware of. And I think in the past has been problematic in terms of clarity for employers. The next slide is simply a graphic, not graphic in the sense of blood and violence, but a graphic illustration of the difference between guidance and advice. So are you simply supplying information? Are you making recommendations? What are the implications and what are the consequences for the individual? And then next up, as we move into the position where we are now in terms of overall warnings for employers in this area. So these are don'ts and do's. I'm not sure why they're that way around, but that's the way we've put them. Important to know what not to do. So you shouldn't be offering fund choices. You should make sure HR managers aren't suggesting transfers of other benefits, or like Guy Opperman, why not just decide to dish out all of your pension savings to buy property? So don't listen to Guy Opperman is the answer. And then do just provide general information and make sure it's well publicised and make sure it's accurate and clear. And again, just flagging that stakeholder pensions do have exemptions in the promotions area. So for a long time, employers have been able to safely mention stakeholder arrangements. And then finally, my last slide before I go over to Rob, a summary slide. Where are we now? The duty to inform individuals about their financial decisions is very narrow, based on Scally. So there's no general duty to give information or advice, sorry, no duty to give advice about pensions and benefits, just to take reasonable steps to make sure individuals have accurate information to make their decisions. You don't have to tell them as an employer that they're making a stupid decision, but you do have to make sure that they have full, accurate, clear information. So that's the end of that bit. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Rich, and sorry about the slight delay on the slides there.
Right.
There's just one question that's come up, Rich. I thought it might be quite timely to do it now, and that is, what is the implied duty of care for the employer where contractual enrolment is used in the workplace? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Rich.
Yeah, I think, again, you follow these principles that are on that slide and in the cases. So where contractual enrolment is involved, you have to make sure that you've given the individual clear, accurate information so that they understand what contractual enrolment is and the consequences of not opting out. So contractual enrolment, in the same way that statutory enrolment for auto-enrolment takes place, there's an opt-out option, and individuals need to clearly have the information on which they base an informed decision. I don't think that it increases the depth or level of the duty of trust and confidence. It's the same principle, which is clear, accurate information. So you're moving from just statutory auto-enrolment regime to contractual enrolment regime, but the general principles are the same.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to now move the slides on. There we go, it's worked. Thank goodness my Wi-Fi is catching up. So hands over to Rob at Hymans.
Thanks, Joe. Morning, everybody. And I guess after the intro, I should make it clear that I will keep more than just my hat on. But we've heard from Richard there. There's very little by way of duty or requirement to do much to look after the financial well-being of your employees. So why do we bother? Well, hopefully some of the stats here will give you a hint as to why it's worth bothering. So the most concerning area for people in consistently coming through in surveys, over a third of people say money is their biggest worry. Okay, so that's not a great place to have all your employees. If they're worrying about money, they're more than 4 times more likely to suffer from some kind of depression or anxiety. Do you care? Why does that matter to you? Well, yes, you should care. One, because you're a caring employer, but equally, it has a financial impact on your business. You know, people who are stressed, who are anxious about money, are more likely to be absent from work. Various stats there on the right-hand side. I won't quote them all, but the bottom line of that is various studies have shown that productivity within your business is likely to be between 10 and 15% lower than it could be if you've got a chunk of your staff concerned about their finances. Good reason to move up there to do something, I think. Now, it's often said that we're all somewhere on the spectrum, yeah? This is a slightly different spectrum, I guess I'm talking about here. Joe, there's 3 builds, if you could just bring those up, please. And you know, where would you sit as an employer? Yes, you can sit back and do nothing at one end. Probably somewhere in the middle there, a lot of us are at the moment, thinking, well, we'll give some information, we'll help a little bit. But the direction of travel generally out there seems to be that employers are looking to help their employees out more and be more towards the right-hand side of this spectrum, to give some support to avoid this anxiety over money and money worries that their employees have. Skipping on to the next one. So why would you want to be at the left-hand end? I mean, some people do. I think it's easy to sit there and say, well, individual finance, that's the problem with the employee. If I get too involved, I might get mixed up in giving inadvertent advice or whatever. There's also a view that, well, it's only the few that are affected by this. Anybody half well educated knows how to sort out their money, and particularly those who are well paid, they've got no problem with money. The chart at the bottom there, without going through the detail, again, surveys have shown that right across the board, regardless of income and education levels, somewhere between 30 and 50% of employees are likely to have concerns over money. That's a lot of your staff, and that's going to have an impact on your business. So what could we do about it, or what could you do as an employer to help your staff? I guess firstly, there's attending sessions like this and getting your head around, well, what are the problems if I do nothing? Why should I care? Hopefully after you listen to us today, you'll realise why it's worth caring a little about some of this. And I'm sure some of you already do anyway. But probably the second point there is one of the most important. There's not a one size fits all here. You can't just assume you know what your employees are worried about. Very important to engage them and understand really what are the biggest concerns. Is it debt? Is it paying off a student loan? Is it saving for a house? And you might find different pockets across your workforce that have different concerns and need different interventions, therefore, to support them. Don't forget, there's lots of free resources available out there to help your employees. This doesn't have to be a big, expensive program of education that you bring in and you pay, consultants hefty fees for. There's loads of stuff you can find. Quite often, for example, you'll have some kind of healthcare insurance or whatever in your business that has with it a free employee assistance program, for example. Very rarely promoted heavily though. And a lot of the employees probably don't even know it's there. There's someone they can turn to have a chat. So I think it's important to make sure people are aware of what resources you already make available for nothing. And if you really are keen to make an impact in this area, I think the most important part is that senior leaders in your business are seen to take this seriously. They engage with staff, explain why it's an issue and what can be done to help them. Relate it back to your business and your values as a business and how you're trying to do good in the areas in which you operate. And I think in that way, you'll get that engagement from staff that will genuinely help them with their money worries. Can we skip on, please, Joe? What might some of these solutions look like? And I'm not here trying to give you a whole list of things, but often it varies according to age, life stages. What is it that we can be doing? You can start with pretty simple stuff though. Spending monitors and budgeting tools that are widely available now as apps on phones are really helpful to employees to get a handle on what's happening with their money, where they can make simple savings in their kind of life habits. Those things you can promote very easily at low cost. I mentioned employee assistance programs already, but various things we can be doing on the left-hand side of this slide, I guess, which is around earlier years in your career typically, and on the right, more around the workplace retirement planning. I'll come back to that shortly with a few more detailed ideas on what's going on in retirement planning. That was really a very quick overview, I guess, of why you might want to support your employees with financial well-being and what are the sort of high-level areas you can get into. I think now I'll hand across to Rachel, who's going to give you some more practical ideas of what's actually happening at Molson Coors.
Thanks, Rob. It's really good to hear what you're saying there, and a lot of that certainly resonates with what we're trying to do at Molson Coors. So I suppose, firstly, good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time out to listen to this webinar today. So really, why are we bothered at Molson Coors about financial well-being? And it does tie in with exactly what Rob was talking about, that financial well-being is a really big deal right now. People are worried about their money, and more so than ever in sort of the current climate, particularly for us right now in the industry that we operate in, and the strains that we know our people are faced with. So we know that if our people are worrying about money, that it has an impact on their mental health too, and their productivity. So our financial well-being sits within our wider well-being strategy. And you can see there the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, our well-being pillars. And some of these are much more developed than others. I would say with financial well-being, we are where we are sort of 3 years ago on mental health well-being, which is much more developed. People are more comfortable about talking about that. Sort of initial experience of financial well-being is that people are sort of quite reluctant to come forward. There is that taboo around talking about money. So we're on a journey. But I guess I wanted to say on this slide that well-being links back clearly to one of our values as a business, and that's putting people first. That's a behaviour, something we live and breathe every day. So I think it's important, if you're launching a well-being strategy, try and link that back to one of your company values. And then Joe, if you could move on, please. So the other important aspect for us is getting our senior leaders to take an active role in driving our wellbeing agenda. And you see on that picture there, that's Phil Whitehead, our Managing Director, who's launching our wellbeing hub in that slide. And he did a video all about that. We've also done various sort of financial wellbeing initiatives over the last few months, and we've had our senior leaders, such as our HR directors, talking to people about what it means to them and why it's important to us that our people feel supported around financial wellbeing, which obviously goes much wider than just promising to pay them 100% of their salary if they're on furlough, for example, which is something we've been proud to be able to do through this pandemic. So COVID has, I would say, really driven up financial wellbeing, up our programme. It hasn't necessarily changed our approach, but it has given us more focus to talk about money right now with people and what they're worrying about. So I think if you can link it back to your company value and you can get your senior leaders engaged in this, then that gives a clear message to employees that this is something we really care about and we really want to help you with. You move on, Joe. So this slide here is really sort of summarising the key steps that we believe fit within a financial wellbeing programme for us. So the first one is listening to employees. So we take an active listening approach when we're designing initiatives, benefits at Molson Coors, and that goes straight across our wellbeing agenda. So I'll go on the next slide to talk about what we're doing to find out what people are worrying about. I think there's a danger of making assumptions, thinking, I know the tool that needs to be put in place to help people, but how do you know that unless you've gathered those views and taken the time to listen? As part of our financial wellbeing programme, we are emphasising our existing benefits and resources. Rob mentioned the EAP service, and that's just one example, but it's something that people don't always know about. So as part of our programme, we have done quite a bit on reminding people what their benefits are and where they can go for help if they need it. And we have found actually that people have used the EAP line quite a bit actually during the pandemic. The third one is really important, and it sits at the heart of our financial wellbeing programme, and that is providing opportunities for people to access quality financial education. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we've done so far and what our future plans are around that. And then finally, as I said at the start, financial well-being is something that will evolve over time, and it's a constant dialogue. It's not a let's just do this now. I think there's a lot to do to get more people engaged with thinking about their financial well-being, and it's a bit of a slow burner. So we're on a journey to keep talking to people, and that way then we can develop other tools, other resources that hopefully become part of our sort of future financial wellbeing programme. Can we move on, Joe, please? So I started talking about giving people a voice, and there's several things we've done recently for financial wellbeing to gather the intel that we want. And it's quite difficult to start that conversation talking about money to people. So we've used several different things really. People like talking to you in different ways. Some people are quite happy to talk openly in a forum. Other people want to answer a confidential survey so that we only get to see high level results, obviously no names. The third area was a personal financial wellness assessment, and this was something we developed with a specialist provider of financial education, and it gave people access to answer a 1-minute survey about how they were feeling about money right now, which is different obviously for everybody. Some people may have a high level of financial stress, but actually can cope with it better. So the personal financial wellness aimed to give people a score about how they were feeling, but it also importantly gave some really good signposts to things that they commented upon in the survey. So for example, a question around debt, it would signpost them to where they could access trusted information on that. We also used employee feedback from webinars that we've been running recently. We found that people were quite engaged in telling us what they thought about the webinars, but also what else they would like to hear about in the future. So that's been great. So if we take all 4 of those pillars together, it's given us quite a good picture so far. But as I say, it is an ongoing dialogue to get more and more people to tell us what it is they need. So Joe, could you turn over? So what did we find out? So in our surveys, I mean, this is not a surprise, many people feel anxious about their financial situation. You know, and maybe if we'd done this survey before anybody knew about a pandemic, I still think they might have answered it in the same way. And getting people to start talking about money and what worries them just isn't easy. I mean, we've got a good sort of baseline level of data, but it's not enough at the moment. We need to keep talking to people about it, so that, you know, 1 to 2 years from now, we can feel really confident at Molson Coors that we've got a really good handle on people's sort of financial well-being. What we know so far, though, is that the top 3 areas that people want more help with is financial planning. So that's the basics, the budgeting, which obviously Rob had in his first pillar. Pensions, which obviously music to my ears as a pensions manager. We all want to keep talking to our employees about that and driving up engagement, right? And then the third area, really important, family protection. So Joe, could you go on to the next slide? So when we thought about coming up with a financial education programme at Molson Coors, we thought about particular dates, weeks in the calendar where we could use that as an opportunity to talk to people. And the first thing we did this year was around Financial Awareness Day in August. So we publish weekly wellbeing newsletters at Molson Coors, which have been a great way to keep talking to people during the pandemic. And we've dedicated some of those newsletters purely to the topic of financial well-being. And we use those newsletters to signpost important basic areas, budgeting with the money and pension service, debt advice, estate planning. We also use the newsletters to remind people about their existing benefits, to drive them to go to our DC pension website, our DB pension website, and start getting engaged a little bit more with their pension. We also launched some webinars, Make Your Money Count webinars, and I'll just say right now, we didn't spend any money doing this. There are lots of people out there at the moment that want to help employers on this journey. Those webinars were great because it gave people in very, easy to understand, fun ways, really, top tips and signposts to help them build their financial resilience. And we find that it's the basics that people want help with. So budgeting, saving, debt management. So that was Financial Awareness Day, and we got lots of great feedback on those webinars, which then helped us to shape Pensions Awareness Week in September. And this was something I was really proud of, actually, because there were lots and lots of people that wanted to listen and ask questions about their pensions. And one of our sort of key messages was, take the time now to think about your pension. It might not be a top priority in the middle of a pandemic, but taking the time to listen and understand can help just provide that reassurance for people at the moment. So we had DC webinars, DB webinars, and then we also took the opportunity to weave in a bit of wider financial well-being in the shape of financial planning tutorials, which linked back to exactly what people were asking for. And we were able to say to them, you told us you want some more help with budgeting and top tips. Well, here's a financial planning tutorial to help you. And they were delivered at low cost. So, we've got a big focus at the moment on saving sort of unnecessary costs at Molson Coors. Obviously, we're in the beer industry, which is under incredible pressure. So I don't have a huge budget to deliver financial well-being and financial education. So one of my tips would be lean on your advisors as much as you can. Our DC provider is Aviva, and they have a whole host of tools, brilliant marketing collateral that's there to use. So that's what we tried to do. Also, during Pensions Awareness Week, we promoted a midlife MOT session that Aviva are running, and it was great to hear Guy Opperman this morning talk about midlife MOTs and something everybody should be doing. We also had great feedback on that, and it is something we will continue to promote. And then we haven't got to Talk Money Week yet, but that's our next opportunity to talk to people. And again, that will be in the shape of webinars, newsletters, signposting. So it's just keeping that sort of constant conversation going within the business. Jo, next slide, please. So to sum up, hashtag let's keep talking. That's our strapline at Molson Coors when we're talking about well-being. It sort of just resonates with our active listening approach and just talking to people, that ongoing dialogue to build that trust. Our future plans for 2021 will evolve to exploring what else we could add to our financial wellbeing programme. There's lots out there at the moment, salary advance, workplace ISAs, lots of people that want to talk to you all the time about tools, platforms, apps. But for us right now, we're making use of what we've got already and we're not spending loads of cash. But in the future, there may be an opportunity to implement some new tools, perhaps, if we think that's what people want, if that's what they've told us. But whatever we do will be grounded in financial education, because it's not a one-stop shop, it's an ongoing conversation. And then talking to people at different life stages is something I'm really keen to make sure we do. We've started it, but there's still more to be done. So next year we'll be looking at splitting it up. So we've got the early careers, the midlife MOTers, and then the retirement planning spectrum. So again, it's just a different way to talk to people and make it relevant at whatever life stage they're at.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. That's really, really interesting. And it's I think as advisors, we spend a lot of time talking to clients about this kind of thing, but it's really fantastic to see how you've rolled it out in practice. So yeah, that's absolutely great. I guess one question from me, if that's okay. I was really interested just thinking about our own governance committee in the firm, and just thinking about member engagement. It was really interesting when you said that there were loads of people who are really interested in talking to you about pensions, listening to the webinars. I was just quite interested, was that across the kind of whole demographic of your employees, or was it people closer to retirement? So I was just interested to see.
It was right across, actually, and I think it does expel that myth that people only get interested at a later stage, whereas actually there are lots of young people and midlife people that want to start engaging more with their pension. Yeah, so I think because we targeted sort of DC webinar was more about learn more about your pension. Obviously the DB people do understand how their DB pension works and they've got a good handle on it, but you know, by definition they are the people that are at the later stage of their career. But we know our people like to talk about pensions face to face. Who does want to read something about pensions, quite frankly? So we know they like the face to face. Obviously we couldn't deliver face to face, but having a webinar, we did actually find more people were willing to attend a webinar than take time out. If we'd been running them at our brewery sites or head office site, I think it would have been more difficult to get those people along, but asking them to jump on a webinar for an hour or listen again if they didn't get the chance to listen live has enabled us to reach more people.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Rachel. That was really interesting. So, Rob, I'm just going to hopefully get these slides. There we go. Excellent. So I'm going to hand over back to Rob, who's going to talk a bit about DC retirement options.
Thanks, Joe. And I promised, or maybe threatened earlier, to return to pensions. So you've got a bit of that. But before I get into pensions, just let's set this retirement decision, I guess, in the context of someone's financial journey. I'm not going to point out all the details on this slide, but there's lots of different decisions that our employees have to deal with at different stages in their life. You know, be it buying a house, be it paying off, I don't know, university debt, whatever. Lots of big financial decisions, but one of the biggest they face is what to do with their retirement savings. And so I'm going to focus now on I guess the 50 plus end of this spectrum on the next few slides. So if we jump forward, Joe, please. Even in this space, when you get into retirement, there is lots and lots of choice. Okay, lots of things people can now do with their pensions pot. I won't read them all out because I'm sure most of the people online here are pretty familiar with these choices. But what you've got to recognise is that most of the members of your pension funds are not at all familiar with it. And it's one of the biggest financial decisions they have to make. And there's huge opportunity for regret here, having jumped into the wrong option. So how do employees find their way through this mishmash of options and opportunities available to them when they've got a huge chunk of cash they've never had to think about in that context before? Can we jump on, please? So what are people actually doing? Two charts here. The left-hand one is headcount, yeah, and the right-hand one is a split by the value of people, value of the pots that are going into those different choices. By far, by number, the biggest choice is to cash in your pot at retirement. But the positive side of that is the average size of those pots there is under £30,000. So probably not too many people making terrible decisions. I think just a recognition that DC is starting to come of age, but there's still a lot of DC retirees at the moment with relatively modest DC pots. But that will change over time. Interesting to see that there is still a chunk of people buying annuities. 10% of individuals retiring are buying annuities. My assumption there is that they're people who the DC pot is their major retirement income, and they need security, therefore, over that money to just for the basic necessities of life. And then you've got maybe a third now, approaching a third of people who are using the flexibilities more and going into some form of drawdown. But that can be an expensive choice. Click over again, please, Joe. So what do we do? How are employees making these decisions? Sorry, there's a lot of detail on this. I hope you can read it okay. But essentially the point I'm trying to get over here, I suppose, is there's around about 1 million people a year now retiring and having to make choices about their DC pots. And there's around 7 million who are over 55 and could make a choice if they want, could start to access their money. How do these people actually know they're making the right choices? Various quotes on this slide, essentially everyone saying it's really difficult to get advice. Yeah, advice is hard to come by and expensive. Why do we make that so difficult for individuals to really get the advice they need, or even the information they need to make a sensible choice at retirement? So let's click on one more here. I guess the biggest challenge here is, over recent years, the demand for financial advice has grown pretty rapidly. On the left-hand side there, various reasons why individuals are looking to get support on their finances, not least of which is they're responsible for it now. The old DB world when they could just sit back and take their money, long gone for most pensioners today. But on the right-hand side, unfortunately, we're seeing reducing numbers of financial advisors out there, and those that are there still are being very picky. They might have minimum limits of 250,000 investable assets before they'll even bother to go and talk to a potential customer. And so there's a real mismatch here between the need for financial advice and support and actually the availability of that. People have talked a lot about tech tools and robo-advice, but at this stage, we're not really seeing a lot of that taking off. And I guess there are concerns from individuals, what can they trust? Rachel mentioned people like that face-to-face conversation about their pension. That's the thing that's so hard to find. Let's click on to the next. So what kind of things could you do as an employer? What are the ways to support your staff in these situations? I get the top left there, I guess, if you've got your own trust, most trustees are not keen to run post-retirement drawdowns or all the options available through that pension fund, and employees or members have to move their money out to access the full range of flexibilities. That, though, doesn't have to be a difficult journey. You can liaise with providers to make it a nice, simple option for people to trip over, say, into a master trust or something like that at retirement, where they can access a broader range of flexibilities. It's often made quite difficult for people at the moment to do that. Second area, communication and education. We've spoken an awful lot about that already, but there is a lot you can say to your members without overstepping that mark of financial advice. I think a lot of employers, trustees, whichever it may be, are fearful of that. And as Richard said earlier, that there's not all those duties to help people through this situation, but there is an implied duty to give them enough information to make an informed choice. And so let's make sure we're doing that. You can move over further to the right and look to find an advisor who could support your employees. There are firms out there growing at the moment in terms of the retirement space, a number of advisory firms who are set up specifically for that. And indeed, my own firm are looking into what can we do to support our clients' members at that stage by actually getting closer to the individual members, not just the corporate body, and ensure those members get access to high quality financial advice. Cost can get in the way of a lot of this though. And so what we're seeing at the moment, and it's a rapidly expanding area, but a number of the providers are creating very user-friendly online tools, simple ways to describe what a drawdown is, what are the risks involved, what different investment profiles might do. We've got the drawdown pathways now that providers have to show. So lots of creative thinking around how can we get this information across to employees very easily. And quite often you'll find providers will supply that at no cost to you. The middle box there, competitively priced, middle bottom, competitively priced. Quite often drawdown, certainly if it's advised, can be very expensive. We see members paying, 2 to 3% per annum quite often in fees for an advised drawdown product. You've got to turn in one hell of an investment return to pay those fees and still have a growing fund. What can we do that can make those products more competitive and more cost effective for employees? Perhaps we can switch on to the next slide. So where can you go to find this support for your employees? And the first place, really the first door to knock on, is your pension provider. Yeah, Rachel mentioned that Aviva have all kinds of tools for financial well-being. They also have tools for at-retirement decision-making and choices. And so do all the other big players in the market, both the traditional insurers and the EBCs with their master trusts. All of these people are out there now with offerings to make this stuff easier for your employees that typically doesn't come at a significant cost to the employer. You can go a step further. You can bring people in to sort of design programs specifically for your staff. That again can be quite cost effective because it can be delivered via webinars or video. It doesn't have to be, the old days when you'd be in a van traveling around the country for 3 weeks trying to catch every member of staff at a particular organisation. This stuff can be done very cheaply and easily now. I know on one of my clients, we implemented video benefit statements this year, and it proved to be no more expensive than the old paper-based ones because you hadn't got all the printing and postage involved. They could just be emailed out as links, and it was very well received by the membership. Don't forget to signpost the free services that are there, Money and Pension Service and others out there who are there to support people and give them the information they need to understand the options that are available to them. But as I said, I think we're seeing now a growing demand from the members to actually get formal financial advice, and that isn't easily available, but can be found and sourced. If you as an employer or a board of trustees select an IFA as a preferred provider or a panel, quite often you can negotiate a better cost deal for your members than they would get if they go and do this alone. So even that sort of, upfront negotiation by you doesn't have to have an ongoing cost. But what it does do is give better value to your members once they retire. And then the last one I mentioned that, if you've got your own standalone trust in DC, you can still create a partnership with a master trust that makes it easier for your employees to roll over from your savings vehicle into their spending vehicle, if you like. So lots of possible solutions, lots of choices that you can deliver to your members and make it a lot easier for those to make what is potentially the biggest financial decision they'll ever make in their life. That was all I've got to say for now on at retirement.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rob. That was really helpful. So there are a couple of questions I sort of wanted to pose to Rob and Rich. But if we move on to Ali, who's just going to cover a really important area, just as a reminder and a refresher, really. So over to you, Ali.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, that's exactly right. If the one key message that I would like you to take away from this is that pension scams have not gone away. In terms of what that problem looks like now, we're seeing it more on social media rather than obviously cold calling, which is banned. It's all well and good making sure that your employees and your members save money into their pension scheme, but if it's lost to scammers, then all of that effort is wasted. Age groups most at risk is the 45 to 65, but I think nobody is safe really. So next slide, please, Jo. So what can employers do? Richard's already talked about what employers' duties are in terms of education, but I think it's really important just to keep an ear to the ground. This isn't a costly exercise, it's just noticing if lots of employees are talking about this great new offer that they've received to transfer their pension. And making sure that your HR teams and your employee benefits teams are educated as to what the red flags are, and they have access to scam smart materials and anything like that. And this bit at the bottom of the slide, it just really talks about how all aspects of your workforce could be under threat from pension scams. And Scam Smart has surveyed football fans and university educated employees and really found that, you know, they're not noticing the red flags from scams. Next slide, please, Jo. I've talked here about what the law is in terms of transfers. Now this applies to trustees, and trustees are in a really difficult spot because they are required to effect a statutory right to a transfer value, but at the same time they need their statutory discharge when the pension's transferred, and effectively to get that statutory discharge they need to make sure that they've done what is needed to carry out what the member requires. But it's now clear that that also includes making sure that the receiving scheme is legitimate and doing the required due diligence. So if you move on to the next slide, please, Jo. So for trustees, there's some really useful guidance, which I do recommend for anybody who is on sort of trustee side on this call, to make sure that you're really familiar with this guidance and check that your administrators are following this. In particular, the Pension Scams Industry Group Code of Good Practice is a really detailed document and sets out really useful questions for your administrators to be asking. So yeah, we really recommend that you look at those. Next slide, please, Jo. This is a more detailed slide about what trustees should be doing in order to make sure that they do get their statutory discharge and that they're doing their due diligence on receiving schemes. I think the key thing, this is all based on the Pension Scams Industry Group guidance, so really do get familiar with that. But at the end of the day, if it's a statutory transfer, then at the end of the day you need to be transferring the pension across. So just make sure that you can prove that you've done as much due diligence as possible, and if the member is continuing to insist that they want the transfer, then make sure that you've got a robust discharge form in place that they can sign. Next slide, thank you. So what's coming down the tracks? Pension schemes bill should make life easier for everybody because it inserts a requirement where somebody only has a right to a transfer value if they have a link to the new employer. COVID, really interestingly, we haven't actually seen that COVID has increased pension scams. I don't know if the scammers are distracted doing other things, but I imagine that will start to come down the line at some point. COVID isn't going away yet, and online fraud generally is increasing as a threat. The new PASA guidance will come into place at the end of the year. That's more DB focused, but I think it will have some really helpful hints and tips as well about the DC transfer world. And the online harms bill will also be coming into play apparently in about 2023, and there's questions about whether or not there'll be something in there about online pension scams as well.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ali. I'm really conscious of time. We've covered a lot of really interesting material. Rich, I don't know if you just want to say sort of 20, 30 seconds on pensions and diversity.
Yep.
I know we can't attempt to cover it properly in that time, but just to
Yeah.
flag really. Thanks.
That's fine. So part of the financial education, it's clear that there are certain groups in the workforce that undersave. So the gender gap, so the gender pensions gap, absolutely clear. I was, I mean, we all work in the industry, but I was surprised by some of the figures on here. Clearly, women are undersaving, generally because they have a more broken work pattern. And the various statistics on that slide show just what a huge problem that is. We can move on to the next one, Joe. The factors are there. Obviously, usually it's down to lower levels of earnings over the lifetime. There's the state pension age issue, which the government has actually just won the latest challenge to that. Women generally tend to work in part-time and lower paid roles and take on more childcare responsibilities still. So what do you do about that? Well, you emphasise the need to save once they're back and make up their savings in the pensions world. That is one straightforward initiative. And the final slide on ethnicity and pensions, also some fairly shocking figures and related to earnings, as would be logical. But basically, ethnic minority in the workforce save at a much lower level. And that, again, is an area for the increased focus that employers should have, if at all possible. So that's all we wanted to do, really, was just flag that those areas do need particular focus within the financial education sphere. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, I'm really conscious we've come to the end of our time slot now. So what I propose we do is we've got a few questions, and I know there were questions that were submitted before the webinar as well. And so we'll answer those as a follow-up for everyone. We'll circulate the slides and also provide you with a recording as well in case you want to share it with any colleagues. So it just leaves me to thank all of our fantastic speakers. Really appreciate you taking the time to present today, and also to those of you who have attended the webinar, thank you very much for attending, and hope to catch up with you all soon in person and not on a screen, but who knows when that will be. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.